Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be talking about the Petrovs, beginning after e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes e5, pawn to d6, knight back to f3, knight takes e4, d4, d5, bishop d3, and then we're going to be looking at the Mason Showalter variation, which can begin with one of two moves, either bishop to e7 or the move knight to c6. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So again, the Mason Showalter can be achieved with either bishop e7 or knight c6, and these move orders are a little bit different. 9 times out of 10, it's just going to transpose. Usually these moves are just kind of played interchangeably, so like you'll have bishop e7, castles, knight c6, and we'll achieve this position, and we'll just kind of start playing chess from here. And of course, vice versa. You can play knight c6, castles, and then bishop e7 with the same kind of idea. But there are some subtle differences between the two. If bishop e7 gets played, one move order that's possible that people will try is they will try bringing this bishop to f5 kind of early, with kind of the idea of just kind of trading off the light squared bishop and just playing a sort of inferior position where they just don't think that white has enough to win because white's lost his best minor piece, which is his light squared bishop. So an example would be castles kingside and then just kind of the immediate bishop f5. But if black does play chess like this, he has to be extremely careful. There's actually a trap here that black can fall for kind of early. And actually a grandmaster very recently in a very top level event fell for this trap with the black pieces and lost a whole piece really quickly and just ended up resigning. So basically here, when white plays the move pawn to c4, black needs to play this move knight to c6, and he needs to hold this bishop on e7. Now this does lead to a slightly inferior position for black. White's just going to play cd4, queen d4. Now black's position is at least fundamentally sound because the knight on c6 holds the e7 square, so this idea that I'm going to show you in a minute doesn't work. So white would just play something like knight c3, bc3, bishop d3, queen d3, and white has an advantage because he has more space and better placed pieces. But black is making the argument that since he traded off light squared bishops, that white just doesn't have quite enough to win. This was played in Ivanchuk versus Wei and Medius in 2017, and after 66 moves, black actually ended up managing to get the draw. But certainly it was white that had the more comfortable position for the entire game. So this is just slight edge white, nothing special, everybody just kind of knows this. But black has to be very cautious. In this very recent game, in this top-level Grandmaster tournament, black actually castled kingside, and of course the position is now completely lost for black. After c takes d5, black already has to just kind of take this knight and just retreat it. Like he has to play like knight d6 and just play down a pawn. Because after the move in the game, queen takes d5, this idea bishop takes e4 just completely wins on the spot. And the whole point is this bishop on e7 is not defended. And that actually really matters because we can't play this move queen takes e4 because rook e1 attacks the queen with the bishop behind it, and the queen has nowhere to move that defends the bishop. And if we take with the bishop, it's the same idea. We play knight c3, and if the queen moves, we would just take on e4 takes, rook e1, the bishop on e7 hangs, and white is simply up a whole piece. And if we go into this cascade of exchanges, if we play bishop takes f3, we have the same problem, which is the bishop on e7 is hanging at the end of everything. So knight takes d5, taking the queen. They're down a queen, they have to take our queen, bishop takes queen, knight takes bishop with check, king h8, rook takes d1, white is simply up a piece. And this is essentially how that game ended. I don't remember if he just resigned right away or if he played queen f5, knight e4, queen e4, rook e1, and then resigned. But it was a fairly quick resignation, just down a whole piece with black, with no compensation. You know, black actually has more development here as well. So we have to be very careful when we're playing the black pieces and we're playing this line. And of course, as white, you want to try to keep this trap in mind. You can win a bunch of early games with this. So that's one of the main differences with bishop e7. Knight c6 is another move order we can use to achieve the same type of structure. And of course, one of the ideas behind knight c6 is some people mix up their move orders and like to play c4 instead of castles kingside. Honestly, you should just castle kingside against both moves. You should just castle kingside against bishop e7 or knight c6, because you really do want to avoid this very annoying bishop b4 check, which at the very least will equalize, but possibly this position, like if I were to play c4, bishop b4 check right here, this position is possibly just slight edge black, because after knight c6, black hasn't moved this bishop at all, so we're not even losing tempo by having to two-step the bishop to e7 and then b4. So it's just very critical to remember to castle and then bishop e7, and then we're back in the main line. So again, the move order doesn't matter so much, so they can achieve this with bishop e7, castles, and then knight c6, and then we're all back in the main line, and here white should just play pawn to c4. So now black just kind of has to make a decision about what his next move is. Now, it seems like just about every move that black can play here, like even if just castles kingside, and of course bishop f5 would transpose into the previous line that I showed, where we just have a simplified position where white is slightly better. But even something as simple as castles kingside, we would just play cd5, queen d5, knight c3, bc3. This position should be slight edge white as well, somewhere between slight edge and major advantage white. So it seems like the best move, just without allowing somewhere between a slight to a major advantage with a really comfortable position for the white pieces, where white has more space, is going to be after c4 is going to be to play something like knight b4. So knight b4 has been kind of the main line for a really long time. So there was this super famous game. There was this game, Walter Brown versus Arthur Bisjayer, which was really cool, and it was one of my favorite games, because it's a really neat game. But the idea was c takes d5, and we go into this long kind of theoretical line, knight d3, queen d3, putting pressure on e4, queen takes d5, rook e1, bishop f5, so far kind of so forced, and then knight to c3, and this was certainly the old main line, knight c3, queen c3, and then they played pawn to c6 to hold this pawn. Of course, now the current theory is just to play bishop to e6 and just give up that pawn. But back then, they thought the position was just equal no matter what they did, so they could just hold the pawn. And then, of course, Walter Brown uncorked this amazingly cool move. Pause the video, see if you can find it. Bishop h6. If you found that, you've either seen the game before or you just are just that amazing. But yeah, bishop h6, and the whole point is if they take it, in the game he played rook g8 and he ended up getting in trouble. But he's getting in trouble regardless. If he plays pawn takes, we're going to play rook e5, rook e1, and then follow up with d5, and we're just going to win an enormous amount of material. So for example, g takes h6, rook e5, queen back, just rook e1, doubling, bishop e6, and then even something as simple as d5, we're going to be hitting here, we're going to be hitting here, and everything is just going to fall. So that's kind of the concept behind this sacrifice in the game. Rook g8 got played. We have rook e5, queen back, rook fe1, and basically very, very similar things happened. White just ended up with a huge advantage. Black was never quite able to recover, and I actually go over this position and how to, have really good technique in rook and pawn endgames, because White converted this rook and pawn endgame absolutely beautifully. He just kind of chucked his passed pawns down the board very, very effectively, and he just got them further up the board before Black really got rolling. And eventually, Black was just forced to resign because the pawn just made a touchdown, and the king was close enough to the black pawns where Black wasn't able to make similar threats. So this was a really cool game. But, of course, the downside is people can just play bishop to e6, and it's not so clear how White can play for an advantage from here. So it's kind of frustrating. Like, we can, of course, just take the pawn. This was always kind of my favorite. We take the pawn and then say bishop d6. We can just shuffle our queen back to c2. Interestingly enough, I think the computer thinks queen c3 is also acceptable. And then, like, after castles, I think the computer is saying that it likes bishop e3 more than queen e4, but I've played queen e4 in the past and tried to play that position. But, I mean, just to simplify things, I would just say that, in general, this position should just kind of level out. Black has two bishops, White has an extra pawn, and it's actually very difficult for White to simplify the position, and that is a goal, because, like, if you look at Black's pieces are incredibly well placed. So if we can start getting rid of Black's incredibly well placed pieces, we can hopefully just get to a position where we have pieces that are on par with Black's pieces, but we're up a pawn, and that should eventually matter. So in this case, White's plan is just to try to simplify the position. But what's interesting is, like, bishop e3 is kind of the more respected move, rook a8, queen e2. This was played in Kovalov versus Salipa in Ukraine in 2000, and White did eventually go on to win. So it is possible to play for a win, just grabbing the pawn and trying to keep it. Other attempts have been tried here. Knight g5 is kind of interesting. You can try to play for a win with this. Another interesting attempt is something like rook e5, and white can go for a win here. Something like rook e5, queen c6, queen e1 is kind of entertaining. All of these assessments, though, come out to somewhere around equal. But they are reasonable. They're all reasonable attempts to play for a win for white. But black should have plenty of compensation with his bishop pair in all of these cases. So that's one of the things that led to kind of a quirky main line starting to take hold, at least for a while. G4 is just another interesting option. And it makes a ton of sense. Like, if you understand the idea behind, bringing the rook to e5, bringing the other rook to e1, this idea of playing pawn to g4 and making this bishop shuffle back to g6 where it can no longer blockade the file, makes a ton of sense. Even though it just severely weakens your king's position, it makes a lot of sense to make this bishop retreat to g6 and give up the e6 square so that we can start trying to take advantage of this file. So there were a bunch of games that got played in this line on the very highest levels. There was this game played between Anand and Kramnik, played back in 1999, which ended in a draw, which was really cool. This game continued knight c3, queen c3, and then f6 is a move. The move that was played between Anand and Kramnik in 99 was queen d6, and then we had queen e3, king f8, knight e5, f6, queen f3, rook d8, bishop f4, queen d5, queen takes d5, draw agreed. Now, the line that was going around for a while that was just kind of like a well-known draw was they would play something like f6, and then you would see this move queen c7. And this is essentially just an absolutely forced draw. And this would continue with castles, rook e7. And as you can see, like, the die is cast now. Everybody has to just take stuff. Queen f3, rook e7, king h8, bishop h6, queen g4, queen g3, queen takes d4, rook takes g6. All of these moves are so ridiculously forced, it's not even funny. Hg6, queen h3, so we're threatening mate and stuff again. So king back to g8, bishop takes, and this position is just absolutely dead. There's just nothing left here to play for. Each side has the same number of pawns, each side has an equally loose king. And this game continued actually for a few more moves. This was actually Anand versus Sokolov, played in Dortmund back in 1999. And this game ended pretty similarly to the previous one, just a draw, eventually agreed, because there's just absolutely nothing here. So, I mean, that's not to say that these are all the possibilities. Instead of queen to c7, like after f6, like, bishop f4 is certainly possible. This was tried in Rajabov versus Kramnik, and that continued king f7. H4, H5, queen takes c7, rook e8, knight g5 check. So, I mean, as you can see, this is still highly entertaining. F takes g5, bishop g5, king g8, bishop takes e7, queen d4, gh5, bishop h5, queen to e5, queen g4, queen g3, rook a c8, takes, and we have opposite colored bishops. And, okay, at least white's up a pawn, but there's just nothing here. Bishop b4, bishop e2, rook a c1, draw agreed. So there was just nothing here as well, and this was played between Rajabov and Kramnik in Nice, France in 2009. So that's basically the general consensus of this g4 line, even though it's kind of a cute concept and it's kind of worth a shot. The general consensus is that black seems to equalize if he memorizes the theory. So all these lines seem to lead to almost forced draws where you have, just the symmetrical pawns or the same number of pawns for each side, or equally loose kings and, perpetual checks, etc. So if you memorize the theory perfectly, I mean, there's a lot of twists and turns, but it seems like these positions just end in a draw, which makes me kind of, at this point in time, maybe a little bit more reluctant to play g4. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think g4 certainly could be considered the main line, but I think I would be more willing to just try knight c3 and just take my hand at being up a pawn. Bishop e6, just, go ahead and grab the pawn, and then just take my hand at being up a pawn. I also think that knight g5 is, a move that's potentially worth a shot as well. I think knight g5 is a little underexplored, and this is maybe a move that we can play in this position and try to play for a win. Knight g5, for example, bishop d6, queen h3 is kind of interesting, king d7, knight e6, f e6. At least I have a weakness to work with, and I have something that I can target. So it's kind of an interesting position, even though the computer assessment gives this as relatively equal. this certainly gives me something to play for, and it certainly is an option. So I would actually opt for this old main line and either just, grab the pawn and just try to win up a pawn, or go for something like knight g5 or rook e5 and just kind of play chess from here. But that's the current state of theory on the Mason Showalter variation. That's kind of what's going on and what each side is playing for. Anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.